Hi, good day. It's a Sunday afternoon. I've just had a nice pizza and a glass of red wine. So I thought now it's time to talk. And see, I only make videos when there's something on my mind that I feel I need to say. And I sort of see a trend coming that I feel the need to talk about. Now, I feel that as we move to the end of the boomer world of security and plenty, the regime, what Woes and Vox Populi call the rainbow regime, will become more oppressive. And I think as we look at it, there are logical reasons for that. Now, as always, in my videos, I like to start with little anecdotes. Now, let me take you back. 2001, when I was doing my MA in early modern history with a dissertation on the gunpowder plot at Sussex University, I had a little part-time job in Cherry Lodge Golf Club near Biggin Hill. Now, what you'd do, you'd normally get one weekend shift when it was quite busy and the place was full up, but then you'd also get, as a little incentive, you'd get a shift in the week. So you'd get like a Tuesday or a Thursday or something like that. And obviously, because my university wasn't every day, I could do that as well. And I was living in Lewes, that was quite near Biggin Hill, in terms of coming back for the night. Now, I remember it was one Tuesday, and I was at the bar, steward at the bar of this golf club, and there was this group of guys who'd just been out for a round of golf around the 18 holes, and they're having their post golf drink in the bar, and they were the only ones in there, and I was sat at the bar. And what I used to do when there was no one there, hardly anyone there, I'd sit at the side of the bar and I'd translate some Spanish. But I was sort of translating some Spanish, and I was sort of half listening to their conversation. And then the conversation went on to immigration and multiculturalism. So little Gus, his ears pricked up. So I looked over, and there were these three guys sat round this table. And someone mentioned Croydon. And then Jimbo, this old guy, he said, "Oh, it's very black." He goes, "It's very black." And then he says, "It's being given away." And I suppose he was sort of talking about England generally in terms of, the impact of third world immigration. And then there was this other guy out of the three who was probably a more liberal guy, who tried to argue against Jimbo. Oh, they were born here, all that sort of thing. But then there was a third guy sat there. And this third guy, while Jimbo was saying his right-wing nationalist stuff, and the liberal was saying his, PC, touchy-feely nonsense, this third guy just stayed silent. And then after a couple of minutes, this third guy, he suddenly brought up another topic. Oh, when I go on holiday, I always take my golf clubs in with my luggage. And then that became the topic of conversation. And I thought, for us nationalists, we've already got Jimbo on our side. We're never going to get the liberal bloke, the middle class, what he was, teacher, social worker, arguing against him. We're never going to get that guy. What we need is the boomer guy there who's not saying anything. Now, when you think about it, that middle class boomer, he probably secretly agrees with Jimbo, but he doesn't want to say so. And the reason he doesn't want to say so, because he's got all these things. He's got a comfortable life. He's got a secure job. He's got a company car. He's got a holiday in Spain every year where he puts his golf clubs in the luggage. He's got a secure pension. He's got all these things, so he doesn't want to get involved in something controversial or put his job at risk by engaging in controversial talk. See, because Jimbo was retired. Old Jimbo, he didn't give a toss about being called a racist. But this guy was about 50 odd, and this was 2001, so he'd have been like a boomer. This was the guy that we need. And why won't he agree with this openly? Because he's got too much to lose. And I've got another example. See, I'll go through a few examples that I've got. When I was in the BNP, because I joined the BNP in 2003, then I was in it till about 2005. Then I went back to sort of the Tories and right-wing Tory groups. Then I went back to the BNP in about 2007-8 and stayed in it till 2014. Now, but obviously, during that time, I'd attend other groups like Swinton Circle, Conservative Democratic Alliance, Traditional Britain, and even some Tory events I'd be happy to attend if I had friends there. Now, in 2004, one of the strategies the BNP had in London was this idea of days of action. And I only went to one because I thought it was a pretty stupid idea, because fact is, if I'm out leafleting in my local area, Biggin Hill, and someone comes out their door and they want to kick off because they've had a BNP, I mean, luckily it never happened to me, but I had a few people give me the leaflets back and that, but I never got threatened with violence, luckily. But supposing someone had, if I'm in Biggin Hill, I know where I can go. I know, the routes where I can run off. I know a mate's house I can pop into. So you're on your own patch. You know where you are. Whereas Richard Barnbrooks, the grifter, who later let us down when he got on the London Assembly, his big idea was, all these activists can converge on one area and it'll have a big impact. Well, it won't, because you don't know where you are. If you get trouble, that's going to add to the complexity of the situation. But anyway, we're in this area up in North London, and we're all there assembling with our leaflets. And this boomer woman, I remember her walking by with her little dog. And just as she walked by, she goes, "Oh, you're wasting your time round here." And there was this guy in the group, he was called Adrian Moore. He was a funny fella. He didn't really have much of a sense of humour. He was quite intensive, a little bit odd. And I remember, funny thing is, he left the BNP in about 2005, like I did, but he didn't come back when it got big. So I don't know whether he went to another group or whether he just left politics or whatever. But he gave this woman a load of stuff. "Oh, it is a democracy, madam," and all this and that. And I'd have just ignored her, because it's just some middle class boomer walking by with her dog. Who cares? I mean, if she says that to us, she's obviously not going to vote for us. But again, why did this boomer woman have this attitude? Because she'd had a life of comfort and security in North London. And so she didn't want us and our policies. She had this secure, happy, contented little world, and she didn't want to think about the harsh realities over there on the horizon. And now I can even wind it forward to last year, 2022. Now, often when I cycle to Puerto del Carmen on a Saturday, what I'll do, I'll go for a coffee, and then I'll go in the Chinese restaurant, then I'll go in the casino, then I'll cycle home. Well, I was going in this coffee bar called Cafe Bagatella, and there's this old guy, Derek, a nice old guy, and he's been here since 2005, and he's not in the best of health at the moment, but I'd see him there every time. So he started talking to me, and I said to him, "Oh, I used to be in the police, but I got fired." And I told him why I got fired, for writing something right wing on Facebook. So he knows I'm a nationalist. And the thing is, Derek the Boomer, lovely old guy, but he's very much the normie. And when I raised something a few last year about multiculturalism, all that, and he just turned to me and he said, when we're having my afternoon coffee, he just turned to me and said, "We were raised to believe all races are the same," and that was it. That was it. He didn't want to talk any, and I don't push my opinions on people. I'm not overbearing, so I just left it. But again, that's a boomer. He doesn't want to think about things. He doesn't want to take on the harsh realities. And that's 3 examples I've given you there of boomers. They're turning away from our ideas, and it's not like they're committed leftists who hate us, who've got some sort of deep animosity towards us. They're not, anti-fascist action. They're not red flare. They don't try and argue back against you. They just don't want to talk about it. They go along with PC for a quiet life. And the big question that we've got to ask ourselves is why? And then it all comes down to the fact that they have got something to lose. See, the boomer has had a life of security, comfort and predictability. Now, we can look at the various elements of this. I mean, it's, sorry, this will go deep, but I thought this is such a fascinating topic to me because I think it's key to how we're going to get our breakthrough. Now, first of all, they had jobs for life. And this secure job for life, I mean, my mate Derek, he was an electrician. And again, 20, 30 years, same company, secure, all the rest of it. And these jobs for life, they were easily obtainable, they were secure. I mean, I read a book on the Dr. Shipman case. I've not got it now. I think I gave it to the charity shop before I emigrated. But the detective who was in charge of the Dr. Shipman case, when he was trying to join the police in the 60s or the 70s, he turned up for the exam and he kept failing because, I don't know, whatever, he was no good at maths or he was dyslexic or something. And the 3rd time he turned up, the guy running the exam saw him and he failed again, and he said, "Look, you're very keen, you've turned up 3 times, I'll let you in." Now, could you imagine this happening today? You could turn up 10 bloody times for the fire brigade, for the army, for the police, and they would not let you anywhere near the job unless you passed, because they've got 100 other candidates. And also they've got to fill all the diversity hires. So again, especially if you're a white man. So this is an example. Those jobs were out there. I've said about my friend John, who died in 2014, who was 93, and he filled in 1 form in 1946, and 3 police forces offered him a job when he got out of the Navy. It just doesn't happen today. And I mean, I remember I was in the police at Westminster, and I knew people who commute from God knows where. I mean, there were people who lived in bloody Scotland, Yorkshire, and they'd come down to London, they'd rent a room in London, then they'd go back on their days off because the forces up in the north aren't recruiting because they need less people. So you've got nowadays people crossing the whole country, not to be a chief executive or a stockbroker on 100 grand a year, to be a police officer on £2 grand a month. So you, you had secure jobs that they had, and these jobs weren't impossible or hard to get. They were easily obtainable. And 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 the job, it was secure in another way. I mean, I don't know how many of you have watched my previous videos. I was sacked from the police because I committed a thought crime outside of work, in my own time, under a false name. I criticised police wasting their time joining in gay pride parades and said the taxpayer shouldn't fund virtue signalling, and I clicked like on the right-wing patriotic group Traditional Britain. So this was outside work, in my own time, under a false name on Facebook, but someone who I work with, Paul Bluer of Bromley, he found it, screenshotted it, sent it to the DPS. So I was on restricted for a year. They were hoping I'd resign. I refused to resign. So then I was suspended for a year on full pay. And then I had a hearing and I was sacked. But the thing is, back then, when the Boomer had their job, they weren't like this. I mean, you think today, and it's not just me, it wouldn't matter. If I was the only one, it wouldn't just matter. But I'm one of thousands. You know, there's probably thousands of guys who've been sacked for a bit of wrong speak outside time. I mean, the comments I wrote, I didn't even remember writing them. And this is the thing. This is the problem. When you're at home, you relax. You can watch your mouth at work and say PC stuff at work. You get home, you relax, maybe have a glass of wine, you say what's on your mind, and that's when they get you. But back in Boomer world, it wasn't like that. You know, that job you had, it was secure. It was yours for life. And unless you did something really bad, like stealing or hitting someone, that job would be yours till you retired. Now, I've got a good little example of how the Boomers during their working life, part of the reason that they didn't worry about multiculturalism or PC was because it didn't really affect them. It wasn't really a tyrannical force in their lives like it is for us. So that's why they didn't want to get involved with us, because they thought, well, it's not really affecting me. And I've got a good example. 1991, I went on a school trip to the Tower of London with my school, Ravenswood School. And what we did, all the children who'd been on this school trip, the Tower of London, they gave us a little voucher so we could come back within 6 months for free with an adult who would have to pay. So my dad, because he knew I liked history, my lovely old dad, who's died in 2013, that winter he took me back, that November. So 1991 November, we're in the Tower of London. Then we go into the bit, the jewel house, where you see the crown jewels. Now, I don't know if it's still like this, but there was two platforms. There was the jewels, the crown jewels in a glass case, and there was a lower platform where you could walk around and see it, and then there was a higher platform where if you wanted to stop and stare at a particular crown, you could stop. But on the lower platform, you had to keep walking, keep moving. So me and my dad, we'd walk round the lower platform. We're on the upper platform, and we're looking at the jewels. And there's this beefeater just stood to our right. And now there's this Indian, I don't know whether he was a tourist or lived in Britain, on the lower platform. And he was disobeying the rules. He was stopping on the lower platform. I don't know whether it was to take a photo or whatever. So the beefeater, he leaned over the rail and gently reminded him, "You're not meant to stay still on the lower platform. Please move along, Mr. Patel." And then the guy just sort of nodded and moved along. My dad thought this was hilarious, and he said to me, he said, "Did you hear? He just called that Indian Mr. Patel." So then my dad went up to this beefeater and he said, "How do you know he was a Patel? He could have been a Singh." And then the old beefeater said, "Oh, he looked like Mr. Patel to me, sir." And that was it. But the thing is, this boomer beefeater back in November 1991, he was just casually non-PC. He wasn't being nasty, he was being maybe a little bit cheeky to someone who was disobeying the rules. And when he said it, there was no tension, there was no subconscious looking over the shoulder. Is there a Paul Bluer who's going to grasp me? Is there a colleague who's going to report what I've said? There was none of that. There was no subconscious fear. And this is what Dr. Dutton says. Back in the 80s and 90s, when we were children, people used to say, it's a free country. Well, people don't say that anymore because they know it's not. And the thing is, that was the boomer working world. Now imagine if I could get in a time machine now, go back to 1991, go up to that beefeater and say to him, you know, in 2023, that remark could lose you your job and your pension. And if I told him I lost my job and future career for a remark similar to that, a non-PC remark outside of work that wasn't even in work, that was outside work in my own time, he would think that was utterly preposterous. He'd think, what is it, the future? Some sort of Marxist tyranny? But that was their world. And that was why they could ignore PC, ignore multiculturalism. It wasn't a tyrannical regime that affected them. And it was not only that, not only was their job secure if they slipped up and said something wrong, they didn't live, people in business, they didn't live in an era of 0-hour contracts and budget cuts and one budget cut and they're gone. That wasn't their world. Now, not only did they have no job insecurity, they also had a good start before they started their career. They had free university education. Now, I was the last year that didn't pay any fees. I went to Exeter University in 1997 and I think I even got a grant of about £700. But I had boomers back then who told me that they got way more when they were at university and they could even make a profit from the grants they got when they went to university. But you think of these kids today, I mean, they start their working life with 30 grand of debt from a simple university degree. I mean, this is why I'd urge people today, just don't bloody go. And not only that, the other thing the boomers had was efficient healthcare. They knew if they got ill, there'd be an NHS. I mean, I remember if I was ill, my dad would take me down the doctors at the end of the road in the 80s, the 90s. You'd see a doctor in 20 minutes. And this has even declined in the last 15 years. So even within recent times, this has declined. I mean, I remember in 2006, when I was a postman, I got bitten by a dog. And that afternoon, I went to the hospital and they bandaged up my leg, all sorted out, washed, bandaged, disinfected inside an hour. Now, my Uncle Alan, who's 74, he lives in Highgate in North London. He went to a hospital, I don't know which one it was, but he went there about 8 o'clock at night last month I think because he was feeling lightheaded, had pains in his head and his neck. And he went there at 8, I mean, bear in mind, this is a 74-year-old man. He went there at 8:30 p.m. He was seen at 4 a.m. in the morning. So they let a 74-year-old man sit in a waiting room for coming on 8 or 9 hours. Now, the reason why that was, there'd been a stabbing that night, a gang stabbing in lovely multicultural overcrowded Britain. And this isn't just my uncle. It's because you think, oh, maybe the 74-year-old who's in quite good health, he's put to the back of the queue. But I was listening to Academic Agent the other week. He's got a neighbour who is 98, and she went to hospital and she waited 12 hours for a bed. So even if you're 98, you're not going to get efficient healthcare. But back in boomer world, you never had to worry. You could go to a hospital if you were ill. You could be seen within an hour, 2 hours maximum. And the other thing that they had was housing. Now, I've talked before about my house. I mean, I'm only able to buy a house. I was only able to buy a house because sadly my parents had died, and I had an inheritance of about 350,000, and I'd saved up 50,000 myself through working and not being married, and my uncle provided the rest of the money. Now, my house I bought in 2019, which is now rented out for 410,000. Just a little semi-detached house, nothing fancy. Nice garden, nice views from the garden, but nothing fancy. A 3-bedroom semi-detached house in Biggin Hill. Now, the Boomer police sergeant who I bought that house off, he bought that same house that I paid 410,000 for in 2019 for £33,000 in 1983. And this is what the boomers had. They had the chance of home ownership, whereas youngsters today, they haven't got it. And I think 78% of private housing wealth in Britain is held by those of 50 or over. And here's a little story for you youngsters who are going to maybe be buying a house in the next 10 or 15 years if you're lucky. That boomer sergeant, you think, oh, his house has gone up from 33,000 in 1983 to 410,000 in 2019. You think, how lucky is he? But he wanted more. And what happened? I put in my offer of 410,000, and he turned it down. He wanted more money. So what I did, I held my nerve. I said to the estate agent, I said, look, right, my offer stays on the table. And if he can get more money, good luck to him. And what happened, another guy from up Swevelands Road messed him about for about 3 or 4 months, and then eventually came back to me. So it shows you youngsters, when it comes to house buying, hold your nerve. You know, and that's what you got to do. And it's quite nerve-wracking. I thought, oh no, I probably won't get it, but I did in the end. And funny, I told that story. There's some guy I used to work with in the prison service called Dan, and he's nice enough guy, but a typical midwit liberal. And I told him that story, and he had nothing to say that because he's one of these midwit liberals who thinks, oh, all you right-wingers are thick. So it's like, well, there you go, Dan. You know, and also I added on at the end. I said they should have had me negotiating Brexit as to rub it in even more. But you know, this housing crisis, the Labour government came to power in 1997 and said they were going to solve it, but they never did. Prescott, I heard this on Academic Agent. He said we're going to build 4.5 million houses, and they never got near that. And in 2016, China did that in 6 months. But the thing is, it's not just the boomers who had reasonably priced housing. Our generation today in overcrowded Britain is probably amongst the worst in history. Because, here's a book I quoted last time, a biography of Karl Marx. Now, he arrived in London in 1849 and he rented 28 Dean Street for £22 a year. So I just thought to myself, I thought, well, I wonder what that would be in modern prices. And luckily there's a National Archives currency converter. You can find it on Google, and that will convert currency from historical times to the value today, or at 2017 prices when they set it up. So this rent that Marx paid for an apartment in 28 Dean Street in the centre of London of £22 a year in 1849, at 2017 prices, according to the National Archives currency converter, that would be £1,764. Now, can you imagine that today? A spacious apartment in the centre of London for £1,764 a year. It just won't happen. And this is why we've ended up in this situation where you get youngsters, late in their 20s, and they're living like they're teenagers still. And Millennial Woes called it. He called it a failure to launch. And this is what modern Britain and its low opportunities and its overcrowding has done for the youngsters today. I mean, I was reading Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail, and he replied to one of my emails once. So he's one up on Dutton. So he's a National Fleet Street star, and he's still got time to reply to his readers, unlike Dutton, who thinks he's too big to reply to the little people. Now, he said in one of his columns that age 24, he was married with a daughter, a mortgage, and a secure career. Now, you imagine that today, that a 24-year-old, they're going to be married with a daughter and have a secure career and have a house. Because it's just not happening. There's a figure I've got, 50% plus of adults aged 24 or under in England and Wales live with their parents. And men outnumber women in this by 3 to 2. And this is because women will tend to marry a slightly older man, so that's why it would be more men. But you see, this is what the boomers had that the modern generation doesn't have. The opportunity to go out, to build a family, to found a household. The youngsters, they haven't got that. The boomers had that. I mean, some of us will recall from the 90s having school friends where their mum didn't work, or their mum only worked part-time. Well, that just doesn't happen today. Now, both parents have to work. There's no choice. So what's happening is this boomer world of comfort and security is ending. And it's ending literally because 500,000 people a year die in Britain. And sadly, the boomers are the next ones on the chopping block. So they're the ones who are the next generation who are going to die, because most of the people who were in World War II who were alive before them, they're long gone now, sadly. So we've got to think, as these people pass on, and not only they pass on, but the world that they inhabited of security and comfort and job security and how home ownership all goes, what's the new world that's going to emerge? Now, AJP Taylor, the historian, said, if you want to peer into the future, listen to what the dissenting minority say. Now, things can change radically. This Fukuyama idea that people had in the 90s that history had ended and it was going to be this suburban 9 to 5 mundane world forever, it just doesn't happen. Now, we can look at small things. In 1942, 80% of British men smoked. In 2006, that was 22% of adults, and now it's 14.7% of adults. So that's just a small thing where radical change has occurred. But bigger things can change too. And I heard this on a channel. It may have been on one of Academic Agent's channels. It may have been a history channel. And it's about the demise of the Roman Republic. And this was caused by the end of the small Roman farmer and the small Roman worker, as slaves, depressed wages and cheap grain was imported from the empire. So what happened, all these slaves were imported, so wages were depressing, and grain was imported, so all the small farms weren't making a profit, so aristocrats bought them out, and there were just big farms owned by aristocrats, and there were all these idle Romans, and the government gave out free grain, and I think they made every other day a public holiday, and they put on free shows at the amphitheatre to try and keep the population happy. It's similar to today's trinkets, you know, Sky TV, mobile phones, holiday in Benidorm, cars, you know, takeaway pizza, all the other, which I've just had, you know, all those sort of things. Now, the Roman writer Sallust, he wrote about the end of the Roman Republic, and he said, the common people, having been dispossessed of their lands, inflamed with a desire for revolution, and having nothing to lose, supported anyone who promised to help them. Now the key words there is nothing to lose. And this is the boomers, they never agreed with us because they had something to lose. But now we're moving into a new age where there's people who've got nothing to lose. And Tacitus also points this out. It was the impoverishment of Italy and the growth of the urban population which ruined the farmers and allowed for the rise of despotic rule. And later politicians realised this. Thomas Jefferson, he said, small-scale property ownership gives people a stake in society. So if you've got a stake in society, if you've got a small-scale piece of property, if you've got a career, you've got things to lose, and so you're not going to be led into supporting radical positions which may endanger that small stake that you've got. And the most radical example of this is Thomas Thistlewood, Mastering Tyranny and Desire. Now, he was a very brutal man. He was a slave driver. He emigrated to Jamaica in 1750, and he was there till he died in 1786. And he was a flogger, a rapist, a torturer. I've said before about the most nasty example in here. Some poor woman wished she was dead, some poor black slave, and he flogged her for wishing she was dead. I mean, how nasty can you get? But the surprising thing is, when you look closer at 18th century white Jamaica, you see how precarious and how vulnerable the rule of white Jamaicans was. White Jamaicans in the 18th century Jamaica, they only comprised 6 to 8% of the population. And between 1730 and 1770, the white mortality of settlers, 1 in 8 died, was higher than the slave mortality of 1 in 12 dying. I mean, this is where we get to race is just a social construct. Obviously, the black people genetically were more adapted for that harsh, hot environment. So the white settlers had a higher mortality rate. Now, the thing is, in 1760, there was a revolt against white Jamaica and white Jamaican rule. In Haiti, they had a successful revolt where white French rule was overtaken. When 1760, this slave called Taki, who was I think he'd been a prince in Africa, so he had leadership skills, and he did a revolt to try and overthrow white rule in Jamaica and found a black ethno-state. So in 1760, you've got Thistlewood slaves who he's been flogging and mistreating for years. They've got the chance to kill this man who's been mistreating them for years. But the thing is, not only do Thistlewood slaves not rebel, during the rebellion, to protect his particular plantation, he actually gives some of his slaves muskets to protect the plantation he works on from any rebels. So the question is why? Why those slaves, they've been flogged and mistreated by Thistlewood, there's a revolt, a rebellion, they don't rise up and kill him, they keep their thoughts to themselves, and some of them are even given guns, muskets by Thistlewood to protect Egypt, which is the plantation where he worked. And so we ask, why didn't they rise up? And the answer for those slaves in 18th century Jamaica on Egypt plantation is the same as it is for our friend in Cherry Lodge Golf Club in 2001. The man in 2001 in Cherry Lodge Golf Club, the BOOMER, he had something to lose. The slaves in 1760 on Thistlewood's plantation, again, they had something to lose. Now, we look at it, people who haven't looked at slavery, they hear the word slavery and they imagine some slave who's chained up all day, they've got nothing, they've got no property, no rights, no nothing. But it didn't work like that. What happened, the slaves, they had huts, they had allotments, they were allowed to have cash, they had Sundays off, they had autonomous cultural and religious lives. I mean, Thistlewood, he wouldn't try and interfere in their religious beliefs or their cultural practices, and they had sexual relations with other slaves. So those slaves in 1760, they would have thought, much as I want to rise up and chop Thistlewood's head off, I'm putting at risk my little hut, my allotment, the money I've got in my pocket, the fact that I've got Sundays off, the fact that I've got an autonomous cultural and religious life, and the fact that I've got a girlfriend. So again, they had something to lose. Now, I had an interesting discussion with Mark Collette the other month about why the expected breakthrough of the National Front in 1979 never came. Now, I always thought it was a lot of it was John Tyndall's fault, that despite all his skills as a speaker and a leader, because he dressed up in this Nazi uniform as a young man, the media had those pictures of him playing dress up in Nazi uniform, and they could push them out and out again and again. So you had voters, you think the voter in 1979, they're probably in World War II. So they much as they were against multiculturalism, they're not going to be pro-Nazi because they can remember the Blitz and being bombed by the Nazis. So I thought this was the factor that undermined John Tyndall and allowed Thatcher to win those voters away from the National Front when she just said, I'm going to prevent swamping. But Mark said it wasn't just that. I think he thought he put it down to different reasons. He said, firstly, it was the tactical failure of John Tyndall to contest council seats, because John Tyndall, he wanted to be a second Cromwell. He couldn't be bothered to mess around with councillors sorting out, a vandalised park bench. He wanted to be a second Cromwell, to march in, take power. But you have to start at the low level. You have to start with the community work to build a base to go on from. So that was an error of John Tyndall looking back. But the other factor, and Mark pointed this out to me, and only John Bean, out of all the people in the nationalist scene at the time, only John Bean predicted this. The other factor that scared people away from the National Front and supporting them in a breakthrough in 1979, when we had far more chance of nipping multiculturalism in the bud, because you think back then Britain was 96, 97% white, it was boomer luxury and boomer certainty. The 2 cars on the drive, the owning your own house, the secure job for life providing you enough to raise a family, the holiday in Benidorm, the secure pension, the NHS, the 3 brands of everything in the supermarket, all this security. And they thought, well, if I vote for a radical party that's going to create a radical uncertain situation, I lose all that. So they had something to lose, the normie voter, so they shied away. And you've got to see, I mean, I've said in my other video that I did about that clueless boom and beer hall pooch, this is so different to previous generations. And previous generations, they always lived with uncertainty and fear. I mean, I've said in Venice, 1575 to 77, 1/3 of the population died of plague. In Florence, 1 in 5 women die in childbirth in the 15th century. Previous generations before the boomers, they live with uncertainty, they live with risk, they live with danger, they live with the very real possibility of close family members dying and pain. And boomers are the first generation that haven't had this. They've had these comfortable, secure lives. And the weirdest thing of all is that maybe humans aren't adapted for a comfortable, suburban, predictable life, because I've found statistics of boomers seeking out risk and uncertainty. Now, there's a thing called the Clipper Round the World Yacht Race, and amateurs, they pay around £50,000 on average to join the Round the World Yacht Race, and the average age on the boat is about 50, so it's all boomers. Now, in November 2017, Simon Spears, a retired lawyer from Bristol, aged 60, he drowned. You think you're a retired lawyer, able to retire at 60 because you've got so much money, able to pay 50,000 to go on a yacht round the world. Now, there was a lot more he could have done with that 50,000 that wouldn't have led to him ending up drowned in the Pacific. And this Clipper Round the World Yacht Race, in 2015 to 2016, there were 2 deaths, and the next year applications increased. And it's not just yacht races, it's also things like, I mean, we know about the Titanic. There's the Titanic sub. People paying 100,000 to go down there and ending up as fish food. And again, that sub, apart from the poor kid who was about 18, 19, all boomers mainly, seeking out thrills, seeking out danger, seeking out uncertainty. And another thing we can look at is Mount Everest. In May 2019, 354 climbers reached the summit of Everest in one day. And they included a dentist, an architect, a chief executive and a housewife. And the oldest was 64. And on average, they paid £33,000 to £100,000 to do that. And you know, so it's not going to be youngsters. It's mainly going to be boomers who've got the money to do that. And that same month, in May 2019, 11 climbers died in 9 days. And people are paying £33,000 to £100,000 to climb up that mountain. Rather than thinking, that's for professional mountaineers, I'll leave it to them. And that again is boomers seeking out uncertainty, because maybe humans are adapted, evolutionary, for lives of risk and uncertainty and insecurity. And the boomers on Clipper World round the world yacht races, and the boomers climbing Everest, and the boomers in submarines down by the Titanic, they're seeking out risk, they're seeking out uncertainty, because it's part of the human condition. And what you've got to remember, how unnatural a world has been created. I mean, Ayatollah, I heard him say the other day about how people occasionally they'll catch themselves not keeping up the charade, because they know it goes against their natural inclinations. You know, a PC society where you can't say anything against any other foreign group. I mean, since the beginning of time, human beings have gone into groups and made laughs and jokes about other groups, about rival groups. It's evolutionary adaptive. And humans, they will always resort to evolutionary adaptive behaviour. I mean, this is why agriculture, it's been invented at least 11 times independently around the world, because it's evolutionary adaptive. And it's the same with this national and tribal feeling. I mean, people point to Brazil as the perfect multicultural society. Well, again, it isn't. I mean, the south of Brazil is mainly white. The north of Brazil is more black. And there's very much still people keeping separate in their groups. I mean, an interesting thing here on this island, the biggest immigrant groups on Lanzarote, you've got 5,000 British expats, you've got 5,000 Colombian expats, and you've got 3,000 Moroccans. And the funny thing is, people that they'll always prefer the Colombians to the Moroccans. I mean, occasionally you'll meet someone who's Moroccan who's all right. I mean, I know a couple of Moroccans who are friendly enough, nice enough. And the thing is, yeah, the Moroccans, they tend to commit more crime, they build mosques, whereas the Colombians, they're hard-working, they're not so involved in crime, they don't build mosques, they're not whinging all the time about racism. And the funny thing is, there's this guy I see often in a cafe round here when I go to buy my bread in the morning, Roberto. He's a nice guy, but I just chat to him casually. And I was talking to him the other morning, and he said to me, wants a John Lennon world where everyone holds hands. So I thought, well, I don't want to have a massive political argument, so I'll best be a bit discreet. But the topic of immigration came up, and he sort of leaned in quiet to me, and he said, "Oh, I don't want any more Moroccans here." And I thought, it's hilarious that. So even the left-wing John Lennon, let's all make friends and you know, demolish national barriers. Even the John Lennon Spanish lefty doesn't want more Moroccans on Lanzarote. The thing is, it's not just that the Colombians are friendlier and they're not committing so much crime and the women are sexier rather than weirdos in bloody headscarves. The fact is, humans, they'll always tend to feel closer to those and get on easier with those who are more genetically similar to themselves. I mean, this is why best friends have been shown to be more genetically similar than random chance would make the case, as Dutton has said, on Dr. Dutton, the Jolly Heretic, on his channel. And most South Americans, Colombians, on their Y side from their male ancestors, they will tend to have European ancestry. And this is even for the darker, more Aztec or browner looking ones. They will tend to have some European or quite a lot of European admixture. So this is why probably it's easier for Spaniards and even for an Englishman like me to get on with them, because I'm closer to them genetically than I would be to a Moroccan. And there's even an aspect, I think, a lot of people emigrated from the Canary Islands in the 19th century to South America. So a lot of the Colombians who've come back to the Canary Islands, they proved they had a Canarian ancestor. So again, this is nature, and what this regime, this liberal elite regime, is trying to do is deny nature. And you've got to remember how different some of the ethnic groups that have been imported into Britain in the post-war are to native British people. I mean, there was a survey that said 70% of Pakistani Muslims in Britain would prefer Sharia law to democracy. 55% of Pakistani Muslims in Britain marry their first cousin. I mean, yeah, Europeans, royal families maybe did that about 700 years ago, but not today. And Pakistani Muslims in Britain, they are 13 times more likely to have genetic disorders, even though they only account for about 3% of UK births. They're making up just under a third of genetic diseases, costing the NHS a fortune. Now, what we call this PC cult that's been imposed upon us, we call it cultural Marxism. And after this man here, but the biggest irony of all is that were this man to be alive today, he would be cancelled. He would lose his job like me, because his son-in-law, I think it's 291. Yeah, his son-in-law married a French man who had some Creole, some black blood from Haiti, and he wrote to Engels, his fellow left-winger, who didn't say a word of complaint about this. He said, Lafargue, his son-in-law, has the blemish customarily found in the Negro tribe, no sense of shame, by which I mean shame about making a fool of oneself. So he's obviously making a non-PC, what we would today call racist, judgment on the black race. And that wasn't the only example. There was a rival French socialist who he didn't like, who fell out with, called Lassalle, and Marx. This Lassalle, this French socialist, he was Jewish like Marx, but he looked very dark. And Marx used to call him the Jewish, I won't say the word because of YouTube algorithms, but Marx used to call him the Jewish N. And Marx, he repeated this joke about Lassalle having black ancestry so often, he came to believe its essential veracity. It is now quite plain to me, as the shape of his head and the way his hair grows also testify, that he is descended from the Negroes who accompanied Moses' flight from Egypt, unless his mother or paternal grandfather interbred with an N. And he also said the fellow's importunity is also N-like. and it wasn't just on black people. He also, there was an editor of the Daily Telegraph who upset him, Levy, and he was Jewish like Marx, but Marx made anti-Semitic jokes about Levy's big nose. Well, you might say, oh, Marx was a bit eccentric, he was a one-off. But this wasn't the case. You look at other people in the left at that time, and one was the anarchist Michael Bakunin, who I think was Russian, and he fell out with Marx, and then obviously because Marx was Jewish, he went into a rant about Marx, and he called the whole Jewish world, which constitutes a single exploiting sect, a sort of bloodsucker people, a collective parasite, voracious, organised in itself. So this anarchist, this leftist, Michel Bakunin, he went into a diatribe of anti-Semitism against Marx. And Marx himself, he was anti-Semitic casually about the editor of the Telegraph, and he made racist jokes about this Lassalle having importunity like an N. So the left in Victorian times, they weren't PC. So this just shows how far our society has moved. That back in Victorian times, even the left wing, even the leftist people, they didn't self-censor. They made jokes about other people and people they fell out with. They might, like someone might, fall out with someone, say you fat bastard. They might also fall out with someone, say, oh, you puff or you black whatever. And so, but this shows that is the natural society. That men of whatever race, they will make jokes or slurs about other races. And this is the way it's always been. And it's so ironic that the guy we name this PC cult after, we talk about cultural Marxism. I say I lost my job because of cultural Marxism, yet Marx himself, if he was in the Met Police, Paul Bloor would have grasped him for that letter and lost him his job. But it wasn't only in terms of race that the left, the Victorian left, were more natural, if you like. It was also in social aspects as well. I mean, there's a brilliant bit. Engels, who was a rich man who I think was part of a textile family who had a company, and he supported Marx, and because Marx didn't have a job and he didn't make a lot of money from his books till after he was dead. So Engels supported Marx, and because Engels lived up in Manchester and he'd send money down to Marx in London. Well, Engels, he had a mistress, Mary Burns, who he lived with, out of wedlock. And the amusing thing is, Jenny Marx, Karl Marx's wife, disapproved. So, she was happy to contemplate violent revolution, the overthrow of the bourgeois, but she still had enough middle-class propriety or prudery to be scandalised by the idea of a man and woman living together out of wedlock, especially when the woman concerned was an illiterate factory girl. But the thing is, and I'm not criticising him for this, I don't think Mark is married to the mother of his daughter, Mark Collette. And I'm not criticising him for that because I've obviously had relations with women who I have not been married with, so I can't throw stones at Mark. But the most amusing thing is, looking at that, Jenny Marx, one of the most radical left-wing people in Victorian times, she was more socially conservative than Mark Collette, who is today depicted as the far-right, prudish extremists of Britain. Yet back in Victorian times, Jenny Marx, Karl Marx's wife, was more socially conservative than him, and she'd disapprove of a man and woman living together out of wedlock. So what this tells us is that our society, going on the Victorian example, which was a more natural society, we've moved a very long way from a normal, healthy, natural one where people go by their natural inclinations and there's Christian morality ruling it and all the rest of it. So our society is very unnatural. It's moved a very long way that even the people who were in Victorian times were the most radical, most leftist, most outliers, by today's standards, they were conservative, they were right wing. They'd get cancelled. And we've got to consider, as boomer plenty and security end and certainty end, there's going to be fewer and fewer people who've got something to lose. And the regime has created this society that is totally unnatural, totally against the interests of the native British people. And pushing perversion, drag queen school out, story time onto little children, stuff like that. And part of the reason why Patriotic Alternative maybe has a more middle class feel than the BNP did is that the scarcity and the lack of opportunity is now moving up the ranks socially. And what we've got to consider is, as this happens, as this insecurity and poverty and lack of opportunity spreads more and more throughout society, the youngster, the normie masses, they're not going to be like the slaves in Thistlewoods, Jamaica. They're not going to keep their head down because they've got something to lose. They won't have any. We'll get to the point where there'll be more than 50% of people in Britain who don't have much to lose. And that's when, like in the Roman Republic, they'll think, right, I'll throw my lot in with the radical ideas if that's going to get me back my birthright that my ancestors created for me. So what are the elites going to do to maintain their rule? And if they can't rely on an innate compliance that comes from people having something to lose, and there's one thing they're going to do, and that's tyranny. I mean, this is why they started the censorship online. This is why they realised, they had to take away Millennial Wave's YouTube. They had to take away Mark Collette's YouTube because they couldn't let us speak freely. They had to resort to tyranny. I mean, there's an interesting quote. I think the guy, one of the creators of Google, he said, the internet will make censorship impossible. And then, when we started talking, these liberals, they seamlessly turned into the censors. And the Bolsheviks knew this because they took away people's property rights. They knew you're going to need more tyranny. The Tsar, before 1917, the maximum number of secret police he had at any one time was 15,000. Now, as early as 1920, the Bolsheviks, the Cheka, already had 250,000 secret policemen. So this is what elites do when they know the majority of the population have got nothing to lose. They up the tyranny. And that is what is coming down the road. And into this scarcity, into this end of the boomer world of certainty and job security and home ownership, we've got the demographic time bomb. By 2050, 1 out of 10 births in the world will be in Nigeria. In 1900, Europe was 25% of the world and 3 times the size of Africa. By 2050, Africa will be 3 times the size of Europe, and Europeans will only constitute 8% of the world. And these demographics is really going to have an effect. I mean, you know, people look at the war in Bosnia and they say, oh, it was Radovan Karadzic and Milosevic stirring up trouble. Well, no, it wasn't. People listened to them because they were insecure because of demographics. In 1960s Bosnia, the Muslims were 26%, the Serbs were 43%. In 1992, the Muslims had gone up to 44%, the Serbs had gone down to 31%. Now Hobbes, he made a very wise saying. He said, hell is truth seen too late. Now for 50 odd years, us on the nationalist right have been saying to the elites as they bus more and more people in from the third world, is this a good idea? What's this going to lead to? And they never listened to us. They never listened to our ideas. And they were able to persuade the majority of the normies not to listen to our ideas because of the boomer plenty, the boomer world of security and comfort. And now this world is ending. And now our ideas come into the arena. I mean, Greg Johnson said, ideas better matter because ideas are our strong suit. And that's the fact. We're coming in now, and as the boomer world dies, our ideas are going to be powerful. But the thing is, what we've got to remember, even though we're going to get the perfect climate where people are receptive to our ideas, we've still got to play smart. And I mean, I've got a lovely little example here. The Battle of Crecy in the 100 Years' War, one of the great English victories. It's built up the English longbowman. He was ever so mighty. He decimated the French knights. But the fact is, at the Battle of Crecy, each English longbowman, he had just 24 arrows each. So he had to make each one count. So even though we are going to have this perfect scenario, we've got to make our arrows count. We can't be coming in like beer hall pooch and being stupid and purity spiralling. I mean, beer hall pooch, he said he doesn't even want reactionaries unless you agree with his brand of 1970s socialism and hardcore Nazism. He doesn't want you in the movement. But we can't be like that. We've got to be open and welcoming. And if we get some UKIP boomer or some Daily Mail reader coming to our shows, we can't have all the anonymous avatars below the screen, below the show, having a go at him and telling him he's not welcome because he doesn't agree with every last thing that went on in Nazi Germany. Now, I'd have kept Britain neutral in 1939, but I'm not going to support everything that Nazi Germany did. And this is what we achieved in the BNP. We made ourselves relevant to the mainstream. And I mean, I know Mark said once he's got a copy of each of the BNP leaflets that he delivered. And I wish I'd done that. I wish I could look back and see the progress and how the policies developed and the ideas developed. But all I've got from the BNP days, all I've got, I think I must have picked these up in the back room of a pub, is these little cards from 2008. Now let's have a look at this little card. This, remember, is when the BNP was at its height. What does it say? People like you voting BNP. Britain has got worse under both Labour and the Tories. It's time for a change for the better. It's time for the British National Party. It's got in red here. See this bit in red? The BNP stands for freedom, common sense, fairness and putting British people first. because it's not racist to oppose mass immigration and political correctness, it's common sense. And on the other side, it's got the key policies. It's got house British people first, stop immigration, build a better NHS, zero tolerance on crime, jobs for British workers, scrap the congestion charge, lower council tax, better education for all. On the 1st of May 2008, all Londoners will be able to vote for the British National Party for both the Mayor and the London Assembly. In red, vote BNP for a better London. Let's make things better with the BNP. Now, this is normie friendly. This is the sort of stuff we need. You know, people come onto our streams and we're going on like David Duke about Jews or the Elders of Zion or some conspiracy crap that means nothing to them. We're going to stay irrelevant. There's everything to play for. And like the BNP in 2008, we've got to be perfectly placed to win over those normies. Because the fact is, you know, debating the wrongs and rights of or how many people were killed by dead regimes is irrelevant. I mean, I've got an example. When I left the Tory party and I first went to meet the BNP and I met Croydon, who are a pretty hardcore bunch of people. And I sat down and I was talking to Bob the train driver and this guy, Clifford LeMay, who's in Croydon BNP. And he was a nice enough guy. But the first thing he says to me about, oh, Anne Frank's diary was written in biro and biro wasn't invented in the 1940s. And I mean, I thought, mate, I'm here because I don't want London to be overrun by the third world. I'm here because I don't want gay propaganda in schools. I'm here because I don't want moss. Who wrote Anne Frank's diary or what type of pen it was written to is of limited interest to me. Suppose you can conclusively prove, Clifford LeMay, that Anne Frank's diary was written in biro. Is that going to solve all the problems we've got today? No, it's irrelevant. It scares normies off. Let's leave it alone. And again, I'm not criticising him. He's got a right to be interested in history, but we've got to be focused. We've got to play strategically. We've got our 24 arrows, and we've, like the English longbowmen at Creasy, we've got to make every arrow count. And I hope and I've got faith that Mark and Laura can do this. Now, but I'm just sort of sounding my idea that, you know, it's no good wishing the normie was as free thinking as we are. I mean, like Woe said, we can go on about normies, about sheeple, and how we read more and we take the trouble to find out more. And I mean, it's a bit arrogant to say, oh, a lot of us are smarter than they are because they just take what they're given. But as Millennial Woe said, at a certain point, it stops being for us a mark of superiority and becomes a downer. At a certain point, it stops being a mark of superiority and becomes a downer. That the other people, we talk to them about our history and our ideas and they're just not interested. They want stuff relevant to them. And that's what we've got to get. And that's what the BNP had. And that's what we've got to be placed to have again. I mean, the BNP at its height, it had one London Assembly member, 2 MEPs, 56 councillors, 1 county council, which isn't bad, considering Britain's electoral system. Now, we know this clash is coming. We know what's coming. These bad times are coming. We know the boomer world of comfort, security, certainty, suburbia is ending. So we know it's coming. We know our chance to win is near. But we can't know exactly when it will be. I mean, there's a great book here, Geoffrey Ham, and he was an assistant. He was involved in the British movement of fascists, and he was assistant to Oswald Mosley. And he said Oswald Mosley never lived to see the nationalist breakthrough, and he died in 1993. He said, I haven't lived to see it either. But he said, I know one day it will come. And that's what we've got to have hope for and be prepared for. And this is the thing. It may not come in Mark and Laura's time. It may be the successor to Mark and Laura who have the fight to have to make the battle to win the power. But we know it's coming. And and the thing is, we can keep going with faith and with joy because we know it's coming. I mean, when Magellan did the first circumnavigation of the world in 1520, he started out with 230 men on this circumnavigation of the world in 1520. Now, of those 230 men, 208 died. So they never saw the world circumnavigated. They died on the voyage. But those 208 who died, they knew it would be done. So they knew their lives, their deaths weren't pointless. They were going to achieve something. And this is what we've done. Even if we ourselves don't live to see it, we've put the idea out there. I mean, I know Simon Harrison, who used to live in Barcelona, he died. And I had looked for his channel the other week. And you think there's all these great channels. There's Millennial Woes, there's Ayatollah, there's Dr. Dutton. He's blocked me from commenting because I criticised his Substack grift, but I'll still praise him. There's Laura Towler, there's Mark, there's all these brilliant people putting these brilliant ideas out there. And the idea is that the ideas are out there because sooner or later our time is coming. Because we're getting to the point where we're gonna get a majority who've got nothing to lose, so they can't be controlled. So the boomer world's ending. What will follow the boomer world ending is tyranny and suppression from the elites, and that's when we can make our play. And even if we ourselves don't live to see it, even if it doesn't come for another 40 years, we've put our ideas out there, so the people who do enact the victory, they've got our ideas to build on and to grow on. As Isaac Newton said, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, thank you for joining me this lovely warm Sunday in Lanzarote. It's so warm I was going to do it without a t-shirt like Dangerfield, but I thought that's disrespectful for my audience. But so cheers. Happy Sunday.